Well, with inflation ongoing and the help wanted signs all over the place, and we see economic indicators like the unemployment rate decreasing across the country, but also here in Illinois, though we still have a higher unemployment rate than the national average. Another economic indicator I think is important for us to continue to keep front and center is the labor force participation rate. And that's a different type of economic indicator. Well, I reached out to Loyola University's Quinlan School of Business and talked with one of their associate professors yesterday to get a better understanding of what exactly is the labor force participation rate. And he spelled it out for us, what exactly that labor force participation rate is. So Peter Norlander, he is an associate professor with the Quinlan School of Business at Loyola University. What exactly is a labor force participation rate? Well, I talked with him yesterday. I share some of that conversation here with you now on WMAY.
Absolutely. So the unemployment rate is a measure of how many people are looking for work actively as a percentage of the labor force. And the labor force is the employed plus the unemployed. And the labor force participation rate is um, it's a different concept. It's the percentage of the population that is in the labor force, including employed and unemployed. So what they're measuring are different, and both are important. So the unemployment rate is a pretty good measure of the pain in the economy or society at a point where people are looking for work but cannot find it. And that's still elevated since the start of the pandemic. So in Illinois, 6.2%, it's above the national average, but before the pandemic, it was 3.7% in Illinois in March 2020. So the most recent numbers, I'm sorry, from October of 2021 are 6%, and that's preliminary. But while it's been coming down, there are other indicators like the labor force participation rate that we're not getting back the same economy. And certainly hundreds of thousands of people in Illinois have essentially dropped out of the labor force. And that means they're not actively seeking work. They're not employed or unemployed in this measure, but they're still in the population of the state of Illinois. So in March 2020, there were about 6,300,000 in the labor force. And today, that number is 6,220,000. So about 110,000 people have dropped out of the labor force completely. And that could be due to early retirements. For some people, it could be due to people not re-entering the workforce because they feel like it's unsafe at this time, or they have childcare or other obligations to care for other people, caretaking obligations that are keeping them out. And the significance of that for the long run economy is that when fewer people are working in the labor force, it increases the share who are in some form either relying on savings or welfare support or other types of financial support. Going on Social Security early, of course, can lead to long run lower income over lifespan, and things like that do have a significant implication in the long run.
So I'm sharing with you some of the conversation I had with an associate professor of the Quinlan Business School at Loyola University, Chicago, about the workforce participation rate, the labor force participation rate. And you heard a lot of numbers there and what exactly the labor force participation rate is. But I do want to just make sure that the numbers are clear here. The Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that nearly 320,000 workers dropped out of the workforce from March to April of 2020. That's when the governor ordered his stay-at-home orders and said certain businesses he deemed non-essential could not operate. Ultimately, people just left the workforce at that time. But the state still is yet to recover fully from that. We have around 122,500 fewer workers in the labor force from April 2020 to October of 2021. And if you look at even 2 years ago, there are 180,000 fewer Illinoisans that are looking for work compared to 2 years ago. And I think this is obviously an interesting number because you hear about the unemployment rate a lot, but this is a different indicator of whether or not able-bodied people are actually getting back to work. And the indication is they are not getting back to work. And that's one thing that's driving some of the help wanted signs you see out there. More from Peter Norlander, University of Loyola University professor at the Quinlan School of Business.
Right. So we have a hot labor market right now, and the economy is growing, pretty fast, and people are returning to the labor force, and that's also a good sign. But the speed and the pace at which it's happening is not as fast as necessarily would be helpful for an employer who's looking to hire today. Um, I think of the recent John Deere strike as an example of how important it is, to have people on the job right now. We saw the essentially the union able to get a lot of concessions because this is an environment in which the companies that can fill their orders and overcome these supply chain obstacles and labor force obstacles are doing quite well. And we'd hope, that continued steady growth would bring people back into the labor force. Yeah.
As far as the outbound migration that there is, something else to consider here as we look at different indicators of Illinois' economy. And in particular, we've seen the state of Illinois, one of three states losing population. And other indications are that a lot of that population loss is working age people who are prime working age, 25 to 55 or some range within that. And that number of people is definitely going to impact the labor force participation rate. More from Norlander.
6 million people in the labor force, and that was a drop of 350,000 from the month before. And now we've added back 200,000 people to the labor force. But you're right, we're still 100,000 less than we were in March 2020, and the economy and population continue to grow. So that's where the feeling of a labor shortage is coming in for employers who are looking to hire at this moment. There are only so many workers in the labor market.
And he goes on to talk about the impacts on employers. They're going to have to pay more, and that could actually spur more activity in the labor force.
Yes. So the good thing is that a hot labor market with rising wages and better opportunities is going to create incentives for people who are on the sidelines to start looking actively for jobs. And as the economy does better, more people actually enter the labor force, and they get out of educational programs, for example, or they get out of other types of non-labor force participation, including caretaking and so forth, because there are more lucrative opportunities in the labor market.
Again, that's just some of the conversation I had with Peter Norlander, associate professor at the Quinlan School of Business with Loyola University Chicago. He talked about how employers may have to pay more, and that could attract more people in. But that's also under the assumption that we don't have inflation as a major problem. But we're seeing, of course, with reports coming out of the Business Economist, that we're seeing inflation going to be around for quite some time, even possibly into several quarters of 2023. So all of next year, we're going to see inflationary pressures as well. So I think it's good to kind of get a little bit of a primer of sorts of different types of economic indicators, because we constantly hear about the unemployment rate and the unemployment rate and the unemployment rate, but that doesn't tell the whole story when it comes to all able-bodied people who are able to work. And that labor force participation rate, at least compared to 2 years ago in Illinois, has dropped, and we are still 180,000 fewer Illinois workers looking for work than there were 2 years ago, and 120,000 fewer than there were at the peak of the pandemic. So interesting to see some of those numbers here. Glad to share them with you on WMAY.